Imagine a quiet night in one of Europe's most idyllic destinations. The gentle sound of the Atlantic waves, the salty scent of the sea breeze, and families enjoying the first days of May in Portugal, when summer begins to warm the Algarve coast. Praia da Luz, a small seaside village, seemed like the perfect family getaway, a safe haven, far from the big cities where nothing could possibly go wrong. Or at least that's what everyone believed. It's in this very setting that the story of Madeleine McCann begins to unfold into one of the greatest criminal mysteries of the 21st century. On the night of May 3rd, 2007, the McCann family was staying at the Ocean Club Resort. Kate and Jerry, respected British doctors, had decided to spend a few days in Portugal with their 3 children, Madeleine, just 3 years old, and the twins, Sean and Amelie, still babies. It was meant to be a time of rest, but it became an endless nightmare. That evening, Kate and Jerry joined a group of British friends for dinner at a restaurant within the resort complex. Their table was barely 50 meters from the apartment where their children slept. The choice reflected a common sense of security among tourists. The place was considered safe, familiar, and the short distance gave the illusion that the parents were right there. From time to time, someone from the group would get up to check on the children. It had become a routine. The dinner was relaxed, filled with laughter and conversation, while the little ones slept in their beds. But what should have been just another quiet evening was about to turn into a tragedy that would echo across newspapers and televisions worldwide. Around 10 p.m., Kate McCann left the table for another check. She walked the short, lamplit path, entered the apartment, and headed toward the bedroom. As she opened the door, she noticed something strange. The window was ajar, the curtain swayed softly with the breeze, and the air felt heavy, different. The twins were still asleep in their cribs, but Madeleine's bed was empty. The shock was immediate. Kate ran back to the restaurant screaming, "They've taken her! Someone's taken Madeleine!" That cry echoed like a sentence. In seconds, the peaceful night turned into chaos. Friends, guests, and staff began frantically searching the resort. Hallways, pools, gardens, every corner was combed in hopes of finding the little girl. But there was no trace, no clear signs, no displaced objects, only the deafening absence of a 3-year-old child. Local police were called shortly after 10:30 p.m. Patrol cars arrived at the resort, sirens breaking the stillness of the night. But here emerged one of the first major criticisms that would mark the case. The apartment was not immediately sealed off. Neighbors, friends, and volunteers entered and exited freely, contaminating what might have been a critical crime scene. The window, the bed, the furniture, all were touched, drastically reducing the chance of finding fingerprints or solid evidence. By the time the Portuguese police began formal procedures, much of the space's investigative value had already been lost. For many experts, this was the first fatal mistake. By the following morning, the disappearance was already in local news. Within hours, it leapt to international headlines. The image of Madeleine, with her striking blue eyes and blonde hair, was splashed across front pages. Television networks sent crews to the Algarve. The story grew into one of the most covered missing persons cases in modern history. But why this case? Why such worldwide attention? The answer may lie in a combination of factors. The family's British nationality, the European holiday setting, the fact that Madeleine was so young, and the image of a seemingly perfect family. The case contained all the elements of a modern tragedy, and it captured the collective imagination. Within days, Praia da Luz was flooded with volunteers. Posters went up on lampposts, bars, and hotels. Drivers were handed flyers at intersections. The search for Madeleine became almost like a war effort. Meanwhile, Kate and Jerry were living the unthinkable. Cameras captured every tear, every emotional plea. They begged for information, pleaded for their daughter's safe return, and vowed they would do anything to have her back. In interviews, Jerry declared, "We will not give up. We will find her." But alongside compassion came criticism. Commentators asked, why leave young children alone in a room? Why not use the babysitting service the resort offered? These questions created fractures in public perception, dividing opinion between empathy and judgment. This duality, grieving parents or negligent ones, has fueled contrasting narratives since the very beginning. To understand the weight of that night, one must picture the place itself. Praia da Luz wasn't a chaotic city. It was a small, quiet village with narrow streets and whitewashed houses facing the sea. The Ocean Club resort stretched across apartment blocks, pools, and common areas. By day, it was filled with laughter and leisure, but on that night it turned into a maze of desperate searching. People with flashlights scoured every corner, dogs were brought in to track scents, helicopters hovered above. Yet nothing. The little girl seemed to have vanished into thin air. From the outset, police considered the possibility of abduction. The open windows suggested intrusion, but some investigators questioned, could a stranger really slip inside unnoticed in a resort full of tourists and leave carrying a child without leaving a trace? Another theory surfaced. Perhaps Madeleine had woken up, wandered out, and gotten lost. But thorough searches of beaches, fields, and nearby land revealed nothing. And so, the night of May 3rd ended without answers, only questions. As hours turned into days, the case became a collective nightmare. Fear spread among tourists and locals alike. Parents watched their children more closely than ever. The resort lost its aura of safety. The absence of Madeleine became a symbolic void. If a child could disappear from her bed while her parents were just meters away, then nowhere was truly safe. This is where the story takes on its enigmatic weight, because Madeleine's disappearance is not only about a missing child. It's about the collapse of protective systems, the fragility of trust, and the cruel reminder that in a single moment, life can be irreversibly changed. From that night on, nothing would ever be the same. Not for the McCann family, not for Praia da Luz, and not for a world watching in disbelief. The case was only beginning, and already it had become one of the most haunting mysteries of the modern era. Narrator, who took Madeleine McCann? The question first screamed into the night by her mother remains unanswered to this very day. Imagine for a moment the seemingly ordinary routine of a family vacation. The sun had already set over the small seaside village of Praia da Luz in Portugal's Algarve region. The salty scent of the ocean still lingered in the air, blending with the aromas of dinners being prepared in local restaurants where tourists gathered to enjoy the night. It was May 3rd, 2007. And for the McCann family, it was meant to be just another evening spent with British friends inside a resort that appeared to offer both safety and tranquility. But this night would become the epicenter of one of the greatest criminal mysteries in modern history. Apartment 5A of the Ocean Club was a simple ground-floor unit with direct access to the street. At first glance, it didn't seem to pose any real risk. Yet the architectural details, unbarred windows, doors opening directly onto exterior areas, and poorly lit surroundings would later prove to be crucial elements of the investigation. The McCanns had settled into a routine during their trip, leaving their 3 children, Madeleine, nearly 4, and the twins, Sean and Amélie, just 2, asleep in the apartment while they joined friends for dinner at the Tapas bar, located about 50 meters away. They explained that they had devised a system. Every 20 minutes, one of the adults would leave the table to check on the children. For some, this arrangement seemed acceptable. For others, it was an act of reckless trust. That detail, the so-called 20-minute check, would later be scrutinized endlessly by the media, the police, and the public. Was it safe, negligent, or simply a reflection of misplaced confidence in a holiday resort? According to later accounts, the evening progressed normally until around 10 p.m. Kate McCann said she had put Madeleine and the twins to bed around 7 p.m. after their bath and a bedtime story. Jerry McCann confirmed that all windows and doors were locked before they left. The couple then joined the so-called Tapas group, 7 British friends who shared the same practice of dining together while checking on their own children in shifts. The atmosphere was relaxed. Laughter, wine, plates of Portuguese food. Nothing suggested the tragedy that was about to unfold, but somewhere between those routine checks and Kate's return to the apartment, something had happened. Something that would change the fate of a little girl and of her entire family. Around 10 p.m., Kate rose from the table to make her round. The walk was short, only a few minutes, but what she found inside would mark her forever. By her account, the bedroom door stood wide open. The window, once closed, now gaped open, the curtains swaying in the breeze. The twins lay sleeping soundly in their cots, and Madeleine's bed was empty. She's gone. They've taken her. Kate is said to have cried upon returning to the restaurant in shock. Panic erupted. Friends rushed to search. The resort was thrown into chaos. Staff and tourists scoured the gardens, corridors, even nearby wastelands. But within minutes, what might have been a simple case of a missing child had spiraled into the beginnings of a global nightmare. Experts would later emphasize the importance of those first critical hours, and in this case, the response was chaotic. The apartment was flooded with people, friends, neighbors, staff, contaminating what should have been preserved as a crime scene. Doors and windows were repeatedly opened and closed. No immediate perimeter was established. Curtains, beds, furniture, all handled by untrained hands. When the local police finally arrived, the chance of gathering clear forensic evidence had already been severely compromised. Many believe those early mistakes sealed the fate of the investigation. That same night, conflicting accounts began to emerge. Some neighbors claimed to have seen a man carrying a child dressed in pajamas through the nearby streets. Others said they noticed nothing unusual at all. One of the most cited testimonies came from Jane Tanner, a friend dining with the McCanns. Around 9:15 p.m., she reported seeing a man walking away, holding a child in pajamas wrapped in a blanket. Her statement became one of the earliest puzzle pieces, a clue that would spawn countless theories, suspects, and speculation. But time, as always, was unforgiving. Each minute without answers reduced the chances of finding Madeleine alive. Meanwhile, the news began to spread like wildfire. British newspapers reported the disappearance that very night. And within hours, the image of Madeleine McCann, blonde hair, bright blue-green eyes, angelic face, was flashing across TV screens from London to New York. The case was no longer a local search. It was becoming a global media phenomenon, a blend of fact, emotion, and speculation. So what truly happened on the night of May 3rd? Was it a meticulously planned abduction? A crime of opportunity by someone who had been watching the apartment? Or was it something far more complex, perhaps even involving those closest to her? Questions multiplied. Answers remained elusive. The disappearance of Madeleine McCann was no longer just a police investigation. It was the beginning of a labyrinth, one that would involve governments, international police forces, private detectives, and millions of onlookers around the world. What started as a holiday evening had become an enduring mystery, one that nearly 2 decades later still has no definitive resolution. That empty bedroom in apartment 5A no longer exists, but Madeleine's absence still echoes. Portugal moved on with its life. The resort was renovated, yet across every corner of the international press, the photograph of the little girl with the sweet gaze and blonde hair continued to circulate. What really happened that night? And why, so many years later, do we still have no definitive answers? Every anniversary of her disappearance, newspapers printed the same frozen childhood image. Meanwhile, criminal behavior experts reminded the world, the more time passes, the slimmer the chances of uncovering clear answers. But the McCann case was not an ordinary disappearance. It had become a global phenomenon. Television programs, political debates, private investigations. Even retired Scotland Yard detectives were hired to re-examine the evidence. Some argued that Madeleine might still be alive, taken to another country, forced to live under a false identity. Others claimed that the circumstantial evidence pointed toward a tragic ending, buried under layers of silence. Without ever reaching conclusions, the case generated different lines of investigation that still divide the public. The kidnapping hypothesis by trafficking networks. According to certain sources, Madeleine may have been taken by criminals specializing in abducting children from international resorts. At that time, the Algarve was already seen as a vulnerable route for illicit networks. The theory of a domestic accident. Some investigators suggested, in unconfirmed reports, that something might have happened inside the apartment and that inconsistencies in the first statements raised questions. It is important to note none of this was ever proven in court. Suspects who came and went, van drivers, neighbors of the resort, even temporary workers were scrutinized. But as the years passed, many of these names faded from the narrative, replaced by new leads. The emergence of a prime suspect in 2020, a German citizen, already convicted of other crimes, was identified by prosecutors as the official suspect. Still, to this day, there is no conclusive evidence linking this man directly to Madeleine's disappearance. Each theory fueled documentaries, books, and endless debates. The public remained divided. Some believed in a larger conspiracy, others pointed to police failures, and many held on to only one thing: hope. The hope of finding the truth. Jerry and Kate McCann remained central figures in this story. With every interview, their faces carried both the pain and the determination of parents who refused to give up. They were met with international support, but also with harsh criticism. There were fundraising campaigns, private investigations they financed, and legal battles against tabloids that published aggressive speculation. The case ceased to be only about a missing girl. It became a portrait of how the media, public opinion, and the justice system can collide in devastating ways, and then the strange relationship with time. Here lies one of the most powerful triggers in this narrative. Madeleine disappeared in 2007. Today, she would be 21 years old. Think about that. An entire life we do not know. A youth that could have been, but remains trapped in the shadows of mystery. And it is precisely this gap in time that keeps the case alive. Because as long as there is no body, as long as there is no conclusive proof, the human mind refuses to close the chapter. In recent years, London's Metropolitan Police has continued investing millions in an operation called Operation Grange, reviewing thousands of documents and reports. But according to official statements, no definitive conclusion has yet been reached. Unconfirmed sources suggest that new forensic technologies are still being applied to the case. Some believe an ending may be near. Others say the McCann mystery has become something else entirely, an eternal symbol of uncertainty, one of those enigmas that may never be fully resolved. It is like sitting before an unfinished tapestry, loose threads, mismatched colors, images that seem to tell a story, but with every closer look they dissolve into contradictions. That is the case of Madeleine McCann in its most complex phase. We are no longer speaking only of her disappearance, but of the layers of silence, of clues that lead nowhere, and of echoes that still reverberate nearly 2 decades later. When a child disappears, the social narrative usually follows a predictable path. Immediate mobilization, collective grief, relentless media coverage, and, in time, either resolution or oblivion. But Madeleine's story does not fit this pattern. What we have here is something different. A case that never dies, reigniting like a flame with every new lead, every suspect, every document surfacing in newspapers and investigative reports. And it is precisely this cycle that we must explore in this chapter. The foggy ground of inconsistent evidence, the unsettling silences, and the way this case has evolved into what some criminal analysts call the most publicized disappearance of the 21st century. From the very beginning, silence was almost as deafening as the noise of the cameras, the silence of neighbors who, in interviews, confessed they had neither seen nor heard anything unusual that night, the silence of Madeleine's twin siblings, too young to ever offer useful details, and perhaps most controversially, the silence of the McCanns on certain points. They did speak. Often, they gave interviews, participated in documentaries founded Find Madeleine. But in other moments, their refusal to answer direct questions from Portuguese police was seen by some investigators as troubling. We are not here to judge, only to present the contrast. According to members of Portugal's Polícia Judiciária, there were moments when the family closed ranks behind lawyers and press advisors. To supporters of the McCanns, this was understandable. A single misinterpreted word could be used against them. To critics, it was a smokescreen. In this case, silence became both a shield and an accusation. Then came the endless trail of false leads. Over the years, hundreds of reports reached the authorities. Sightings of Madeleine in airports, supermarkets, border posts. Witnesses swore they saw her in Morocco in the company of strangers. Others claimed she was in cars crossing into neighboring countries. Police records confirmed that each lead was pursued, and time after time, they ended in nothing. One famous case occurred in 2007, when a British woman believed she saw Madeleine at a gas station in Marrakesh. The account was taken seriously, but the investigation found no solid evidence. Still, the story made international headlines, creating hope, pressure, and, ultimately, disappointment. And this is one of the dilemmas in high-profile cases. The weight of hope against the cold reality of evidence. What police investigated as uncertain, the media often transformed into near certainty. When nothing was confirmed, the frustration only deepened. If there is one thing that defines the McCann case, it is the abundance of theories, some rooted in plausible details, others in speculation alone. The theory of organized abduction, Madeleine taken by a child trafficking network. The reasoning that fair-haired children with light eyes are highly sought after in such circles. Experts in international crime have confirmed that Portugal has, at times, been used as a transit route in human trafficking cases. The theory of a concealed accident, advanced by some Portuguese investigators, suggesting that Madeleine may have died accidentally in the apartment and that her parents, in desperation, concealed the event. The theory gained traction after cadaver dogs alerted to scents in the apartment and in the McCann's rental car. Yet later analysis raised serious doubts about the scientific reliability of those findings. The theory of local predators. Another line suggested Madeleine may have been the victim of an opportunistic criminal in the tourist area. According to unverified sources, there were indeed records of pedophiles operating in villages near the resort. None of these theories has ever been conclusively proven. None has ever been completely dismissed. The role of the media cannot be ignored. From the beginning, British, Portuguese, and international outlets immersed themselves in the story. Television shows staged reconstructions. Magazines published exhaustive timelines. Documentaries each brought their own angle. This saturation of coverage produced two outcomes. The benefit, visibility. Madeleine's image became impossible to forget, keeping the case alive, generating new leads, maintaining pressure on authorities. The danger, speculation. When facts ran dry, media turned to rumor, theories, and veiled accusations. Parents, friends, even investigators, all were placed under constant suspicion. Some journalists would later admit there was a competition among British newspapers for exclusives, sometimes at the expense of verified truth. As the years passed with answers still out of reach, a new suspect emerged. In 2020, German authorities identified Christian Bruckner, a man with a record of child abuse, as a possible perpetrator. Reports placed him in Portugal at the time of Madeleine's disappearance. German police went as far as declaring publicly they had concrete evidence that Madeleine was dead. Yet, to this day, no such evidence has been disclosed. This announcement reignited global debate. If the evidence truly existed, why was it never made public? Authorities claimed the case was ongoing. To the public, it felt like another promise, without resolution. And so we return to the central dilemma of this chapter. The McCann case has become larger than the investigation itself. It is at once a family tragedy, a media spectacle, an international inquiry, and something else entirely, a mystery with the weight of literature. Perhaps that is why it continues to haunt us, because it forces us to face a deeply unsettling truth. The world does not always provide answers. Justice does not always fill the void. And in that void, only echoes remain. Echoes of voices calling a little girl's name. Echoes of questions that never find answers. Echoes of a case that seems destined to remain open. The disappearance of Madeleine McCann is not just another police file. It is a mirror of our social vulnerabilities, of the power of the media, of investigative flaws, and of a family's unbearable grief. And as we draw closer to the end of this story, the same question still hangs in the air. What really happened that night in May 2007? The question that refuses to fade. Where is Madeleine McCann? Nearly 2 decades have passed since that night in Portugal in 2007. Yet the case remains alive, echoing through headlines, forums, courtrooms, and family conversations, whispered in fear that such a tragedy could strike them too. Today, the McCanns live suspended between hope and sorrow. They have never declared their daughter dead. They keep her room untouched, as though Madeleine might return at any moment. And every so often a new lead appears, a suspect, a face, a story that seems to fit, but almost always, it is only another mirage. In 2020, a name once again shook the world. Christian Bruckner, a German man convicted of child abuse and sexual crimes. Portuguese and German authorities pointed to him as the prime suspect. Reports claim he lived near the resort at the time of the disappearance, and according to police sources, he even made provocative remarks to friends, half confessions. But to this day, nothing has been proven, no body, no conclusive evidence. The investigation lingers, caught between fact and speculation. Among experts, a bitter consensus emerges. Either Madeleine was the victim of a cruel, isolated crime, buried forever in the silence of the one who committed it, or the case was scarred by such deep mistakes that the truth may never come to light. Some believe the parents hid something, others that authorities failed from the very first minute, and still others that Madeleine may be alive, living under another identity, unaware of who she truly is. Stories surface in shadowy blogs and internet forums. Young women appear from time to time convinced they are Madeleine, asking for DNA tests. But so far, every test has come back negative. The disappearance of Madeleine McCann is not just a criminal case. It is a mirror of human vulnerability, a reminder that even in places we believe are safe, life can change in a single instant. And it is also a cruel lesson. No matter how advanced our technology, how many cameras, forensic tools, or international investigations, sometimes the truth simply slips away. And so we return to the question that has haunted us from the beginning. What happened to Madeleine McCann? The answer remains cloaked in shadows, and perhaps it will never be revealed. But as long as doubt endures, as long as hope survives, as long as someone is willing to search, this case will never be forgotten. Because in the end, this is not only the story of a missing child, it is an open wound in the collective conscience, a mystery that does not belong only to Portugal or to the United Kingdom, but to the entire world.